Can I welcome Barbara Allison? Thank you for coming along again, Miss Allison. And may I ask you to take the oath? Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God that I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I swear by Almighty God I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And I now invite Miss Allison to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you for the opportunity of providing an opening statement for this session, in addition to the statement I gave to the committee on the 15th of September. For ease of reference and by way of a brief reminder about my current and previous role and responsibilities as Director of Communications, Ministerial Support and Facilities, and my previous role as Director of People with regard to matters which relate to the committee's remit. I've worked with the Scottish Government since 2008, following 14 years with the Scottish Prison Service, latterly as Director of HR there for 5.5 years. I was asked to join SG as Head of HR in January 2008 and subsequently promoted to Director of HR and Corporate Services in 2009. Since 2016, I've been Director of Communications, Ministerial Support and Facilities. This session is focused on the judicial review and related commission process. As I mentioned in my previous opening statement, in November 2017, I had some early and limited contact with 2 individuals who ultimately became complainants under the policy on handling of harassment complaints. Given the confidential restrictions which apply, I would ask the committee's forbearance if I'm hesitant about whether I can answer certain questions or if I seek advice from the convener or from SGLD legal team before doing so. In relation to my early contact with the 2 individuals, I was asked to provide documents as part of the judicial review and attended the Commission for Evidence in December 2018. However, I was not involved in the judicial review in a decision-making capacity. To the extent that it may be relevant for today's session, although I had some early and limited contact with the complainers, I was not involved in the investigation process. Finally, I repeat that I am giving evidence to the committee on behalf of ministers and not in a personal capacity. Convener, as the committee appreciates, this is complex legal territory, and as I've explained, I am privy to certain information that was subject of legal proceedings and the confidentiality of which is now protected. I ask the committee's patience if I am cautious in answering questions on certain matters, or if I will have to stop and seek advice or follow-up questions in writing with detail to ensure accuracy and ensure the government's legal duties are fulfilled. I again would wish to declare I am a member of the FDA Union. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Committee members have many questions to ask, and I'll move first to our Deputy Convener, Margaret Mitchell.
Good morning, Ms Allison. If I could ask some questions along the theme of Commission and decision to concede. Were you involved in the Scottish Government's response to the Commission as well as being cited as a haver?
I was asked to provide information on occasions to the Commission.
Right. Can you outline what occasions these were?
So I was asked to provide a copy of the texts that I had with Miss B, and there was a specification for documents on the 17th of December, and I provided a response to that. And other than that, it would be ad hoc information provided.
Right. And was that the limit of your involvement in terms of the Scottish Government's response?
Yes, I was involved in regular update meetings, but not. There was update meetings, and there was decision where the decisions were being taken. I was involved in update meetings in connection with the judicial review.
Okay. Without going into detail on the specifics contained within the documents, what documents specifically were you cited as a haver to give evidence on? You've missed a text and document 17. Was there anything else you were cited specifically to give evidence on?
So there was a list of requirements on the specification on the 17th of December. I said I had already provided the texts that I had with Miss B, and I confirmed that I had no other texts with her. I had no texts or WhatsApp contact with Miss A. In terms of the additional searches that I did in relation to the 17th of December specification, I provided 2 additional documents to hand over to the Commission.
And these documents were?
One was a response to Miss Russell. Miss Russell and I had met Miss A on the 22nd, I think, of November, and there was a statement taken of her concern at the time. What I provided to the Commission at that time was me providing Ms Russell with some tracked changes to the note of that meeting. And the second document was an email to Miss B, where I provided her the text of the Permanent Secretary's all-staff message on the 13th of November.
Okay, thank you. And are you able to say the nature of Miss Russell's concern, as long as it isn't, you know, to do with the substance of the complaint from the complainers? I think you said Miss Russell's stated concern in one of the first documents.
Sorry, so Miss Russell and I met Miss A on the 22nd of November, and there was a draft note produced of that, and I was responding to Miss Russell with some track changes to the note of the meeting.
Okay. Right, okay, that's fine. You gave evidence to the Commission hearing. Was that on the first day of the Commission hearing, any other day?
It was on the 19th of December, yes.
Right. In what capacity did you give evidence? Was it as Director of Communications? Was it in your pastoral role? Was it in any previous role or any other capacity?
It wasn't clear in terms of what my capacity was.
And the evidence you gave then, what did it relate to? Which role? So
the evidence I gave to was in relation to my early contact with Miss A and Miss B.
And when you mean early contact, how long are we talking about?
So that was in November 2017.
Okay, thank you. I wonder, just to move on a little bit, in terms of the ministerial oversight of the judicial review process, which government ministers were regularly advised on the outcomes of the legal discussions?
I wasn't involved with that, but I'm aware that the Lord Advocate was involved, but I'm not aware of any other ministers being involved.
And did you update any ministers directly in your capacity as Director of Communication?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener, and welcome back to Ms Allison. Can I thank you for your further letter to the committee identifying that you were indeed the recipient of the text message from the Permanent Secretary, and let me refresh both your memory and everybody else's about what was actually said. And this is from Leslie Evans. Thanks, Barbara. Battle may be lost, but not the war. Hope you're having lovely and well-deserved break. L. Your response, thanks, Leslie. It is lovely here. My mind and thoughts are with you all there, though. Best wishes, B. Could I ask, what was the message that you sent that Leslie Evans was replying to?
I don't know. I don't have that. As I said, I didn't recall having received this message. I was answering to the best of my recollection at the time. After I left the committee, because I realised that you had some concerns with my reply, I searched my phone, I didn't have the messages, and I contacted the Crown Office in relation to anything that had been handed over in terms of the criminal proceedings, and that these were the two messages that they came back in relation to the question you asked.
And here was me thinking I had a poker face, Miss Allison. Clearly
Sorry.
not. Can I ask, though, that surely what the reply was to would have been handed over to the Crown Office? Are you saying that message simply doesn't exist?
It wasn't handed back to me, so I'm assuming it doesn't exist.
Okay. Can you tell me when the messages were sent?
At the 8th of January 2019.
So that would be significant because that was after the collapse of the judicial review.
It was after the judicial review was conceded, yes.
Okay, okay. Can I ask your understanding of what you interpret to be the battle and what you interpret to be the war?
I mean, obviously I didn't write the text, but I think in Permanent Secretary's earlier evidence, she talked about her continual focus on equality.
But in fairness, you don't disturb somebody on holiday in the Maldives to send a message about broader equality issues. It was directly linked to the collapse of the judicial review for the Scottish Government, wasn't it?
It was at that time, yes.
Yes. So given that she interrupted you on a well-deserved break, or you interrupted her, what was the battle?
I assume that it was connected with the judicial review, but as I said...
Okay, that's fine. That's what I would assume too. What, therefore, would you assume was the war?
I said I didn't write the text, so I don't know what
I know. I'm asking you to interpret a text sent to you by somebody who clearly was close to you.
So my view is, Permanent Secretary has, since she came in 2015, made a concerted effort to ensure that people feel included and heard. I'm assuming it was the broad context of trying to make sure that women can come forward.
Okay. Let me move on to responses that you gave to me last time you were here. And let me ask again, did you write to or contact former staff to encourage them to complain to the police about the former First Minister?
No.
Really?
No, I did not. I did not write to. And there's one. Sorry, I'm very conscious of identification.
I'm not asking you to name anybody. I'm simply asking you whether you wrote to a former staff member or contacted them to encourage them to complain to the police about the former First Minister.
No.
You're quite certain about that?
Yes.
You didn't do it at the instigation of a special advisor? No. You didn't do it after the police started their investigation?
No, I remember there was contact when the police, it was initially announced as a police investigation, and there was some concern that names might have been given over who were potential witnesses, and whether they would be concerned about, about the police investigation. And there was some correspondence about did we have to make contact, etc. And there was one particular person mentioned in relation to should they be, but they weren't a former member of staff. Okay. So I'm aware of one particular person who was mentioned, who was, and whether we should be making sure that they were aware and were okay.
And did you make that person aware?
I did not, but because I knew I was told that they were already aware. Okay. So I'm sorry, Miss Bailey. I again realise that you seem to have evidence that I don't have.
I'm smiling.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not expressing disbelief. I'm simply testing the point.
So if you have something, that you feel that I'm not providing, perhaps if you could give me some information about it, I'd be happy to respond to you on that.
Excellent, thank you. Have you ever expressed concern or had concerns expressed to you about interference by special advisors in the civil servants' complaints process?
Could you ask that again? Sorry.
Okay. Have you ever expressed concern or have you had concern expressed to you about interference by special advisors in the civil service complaints process?
There was... during the investigation, there was some correspondence between myself and some other people about somebody who was perhaps going to give evidence or witness. And in my pastoral care role, I was asked whether I could offer some support at that time. Yeah, I think that's what you're probably referring to.
Okay, I will leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Angela Constance, please.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to Miss Allison. Miss Allison, in terms of evidence we've heard from you previously, you have said that you had no direct involvement in the development of the new policy on harassment, but you did have a role in pastoral care. We've heard that you had some contact with complainants, but you were not involved in the actual investigation. And you've said today that you were obviously a participant in the judicial review process, but you were not a decision maker. Can you therefore explain, as much as you can, why the Commission were interested in you, and can you explain about what evidence in terms of the substance that you had and why this was considered to be important?
As I understand it, as the judicial review went on, there was particular interest in early contact with Miss A and Miss B, and I think Miss McKinnon referred to it earlier. So, as I've mentioned, so I had early contact with both, and I'm conscious that that the committee have not yet had the final tranche of evidence, which I'm sure would be helpful. Perhaps I could. So I had early contact with Miss B, and the contact that she and I had were a series of texts. I had, I think, 3 telephone calls with her, but no meetings. But there was never a record taken of any of her concerns. So, you know, that was the contact with Miss B. With Miss A, my one contact with her was, as I said, in relation to the meeting that Miss Russell and I had with her, where a note was taken of her concerns.
Okay, and why do you think that this contact and this information was important?
I think because it was the sort of early contact and just sort of understanding how that came about, and I understand both of them came about as a result of the Permanent Secretary's staff message on the 2nd of November, when she put a note out to all staff talking about cultures and behaviours and ensuring people felt that they were supported to come forward, etc. And it was, as my understanding, it was a result of that both individuals came forward.
Okay, and just to be clear, Miss Allison, in terms of the information that you held in terms of texts and a note of a meeting with one of the complainants, was that information made freely available in early course of the judicial review process, or did you have to be asked for it?
So I made it known to Scottish Government officials that I had texts from Miss B, and I was then asked to provide them on the 12th of December, and the report, the note from Miss A, Miss A was already known about prior to that.
Okay, so when did you tell colleagues about the texts? When did you tell the Scottish Government that you had texts from one of the...
I can't recall, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and what involvement did you have in terms of seeking legal advice and legal support? Was that internal to SGLD? Was it external? You know, what was the nature and the flavour of that?
In relation to what? Sorry, which?
Your involvement with the judicial review process.
So we, I didn't seek any legal advice, to be honest.
Okay.
We were just asked to, you know, do the searches and then provide.
Okay. So your involvement in the commission and that hearing, you weren't supported with internal legal advice or support?
So
you just pitch up like you did here today yourself?
So before the appearance at the commission on the 19th of December, there was a session with colleagues who were attending the commission and SGLD colleagues the evening before, when we were provided with an explanation about what a commission was and provided with the documents that had been already handed over. So it was quite ad hoc and quite late.
Okay. Is there a written record of that meeting at all?
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. I don't think so. I think it was more just a sort of informal meeting, but I don't think it was a meeting.
And can you remind me, Miss Allison, who do you report to?
So I currently report to the DG, Organisational Development and Operations.
Mm-hmm. And at the time, who did you report to?
Same DG.
And that's in terms of position, but are you able to name the person? I think they're senior enough?
At the time, it was Sarah Davidson. And
That's fine. And just one final question from me, convener. Ms Allison, you have substantial public sector experience, and I just wondered, with all of your experience, with hindsight, is there anything that you or your colleagues could have done different?
I think certainly not being a lawyer and never having been involved in judicial review before, I think it would have been helpful to have been clearer exactly what was required of us and what would be expected of us in terms of providing information, etc. So I think in hindsight that would have been very helpful if we could have, if you know, the people who were involved ultimately had more information at the start.
Okay, so that's, you point to a lack of support from legal colleagues, perhaps, or a lack of awareness around judicial review processes. I suppose what my question was more pointed towards, is there anything you or your colleagues in your roles could have done differently?
I'm not aware of anything. I mean, I think we did everything that we were asked at the time that we thought, you know, we were doing correctly. I'm not. I think, but I said in hindsight, you know, I think we would have done it differently.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, convener.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Convener, good morning again, Ms Allison. Thanks for coming back to see us. I'd just like to start by following up on a couple of questions from Jackie Bailey. Can I start by asking Ms Allison, what kind of phone do you have?
Got an iPhone.
An iPhone, okay. And is it the same, regardless of whether it's the same handset, you've not changed contracts to the point where you would have to restore or completely restart a new phone or anything like that? Okay. So, and I'm not going to ask you to do this, but hypothetically, if we needed you to, could you access the text messages right now from the complainers that appeared in the judicial review?
Yes.
Okay, so you could access messages on your phone that were sent in 2017, but you're telling Ms Bailey that when you searched your phone for the message that was replied to by the Permanent Secretary about losing the battle but winning the war, you couldn't find that.
Yeah.
Is that did you delete that message?
Yes, I mean, I have deliberately kept the text messages from Miss B because I was very conscious that they were the only record that I had of my contact with her. And I said it was text, some calls. And when I first took the call from Miss B, I was walking to work, and I didn't make a note of the call or anything that was said. And in fact, one of the texts back to her later on says, "I'm conscious that I've never taken a note, you know, of this, etc." So I was very conscious that it was a very strange time, as you might imagine, when people were coming forward with concerns, and somebody had come forward with something that they didn't feel they were able to share with the organisation at the time, and I felt I was trying to hold a space open for her, basically, and not be seen to be in any way, you know, closing down, dismissing or anything, but likewise not be trying to seem to force come forward. So sorry. So I was very conscious that I hadn't made a note of it, and the only thing that I had about the contact with her were the texts. So I kept those texts. I don't routinely keep all my texts. I will, you know, clear out texts, you know. So yes, I must have deleted some texts, but I know I specifically kept the text with Miss B for a reason.
So, but there was definitely so I'm just, forgive me if I'm not getting this right. There was a year, or rather, you sent a text to Leslie Evans to which you replied about winning the battle but losing the war. You'd kept texts for the year previous from complainers, but you deleted at some point in the near future after you received that text from Leslie Evans, your original text that sent to her. Do you have any recollection of what you sent to Leslie which precipitated that response?
No, I don't. Sorry. I didn't remember getting Leslie's replies. I don't remember what I initially said.
Okay, I'll move on. This is a slightly off topic, but I think it's important considering that you're here in front of us again. We received a letter from Sir Peter Housden last week to clarify that he had never discussed concerns about bullying behaviour on the part of Alex Salmond. And yet the Dignity at Work policy, we know, was changed in 2010 after trade unions raised concerns about bullying behaviour, specifically from Mr. Salmond, while you were the Director of People. One of the 2010 changes was that escalated complaints against ministers would be dealt with by the Permanent Secretary and the Deputy First Minister. So that's the person in charge of the civil service, but interestingly, not the person who's in charge of the government. It's their number two. Otherwise, it would be the First Minister. So it's hard to believe that Nicola Sturgeon would take on that role without understanding the subtext as to why. Was Nicola Sturgeon ever clear as to why these changes were being made and why she was being given that central role in dealing with complaints?
I'm not aware of that. I know that the Permanent Secretary spoke to the First Minister at the time about the change in policy, but I'm not I don't know whether he spoke to the Deputy First Minister at the same time.
I accept that. But could we infer that reality of the response of changing the policy following the intervention by the unions raising concerns about concerns around the former First Minister's behaviour? This is another example of a procedure being redesigned so that it might one day potentially fit complaints against Mr. Salmond.
I think the unions certainly at the time had raised concerns about behaviours with ministers, and I recall that the First Minister was mentioned at the time.
Is it a reasonable interpretation for us to say that this policy was retrofit in order to be deployed should it ever be needed if a formal complaint came against the First Minister?
I can't recall why that particular clause was put into place.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to the handling of complaints. Without going into any detail that might identify her, can you describe the conversation in which Miss A revealed her allegations against Mr. Salmond? For example, how did that come about? Who made the initial approach? What precipitated her to come forward?
So, as I mentioned, the Permanent Secretary's note of the 2nd of November told staff. So that initially, I understand, precipitated a contact with Miss A, and then she had come forward to Gillian Russell to say that she wanted to share a concern. Separately, somebody had approached me to say that Miss A would like to have a chat with me in my pastoral role care, and we agreed we would see her together.
So did you get the impression that Miss A, perhaps in the understanding that of the environment everyone was in at the time with the Me Too and the knowledge perhaps that the harassment complaint was being updated, that she was actually sharing that with a number of individuals within her circle in the civil service?
I don't know.
Okay. So we knew that Judith McKinnon, or we know that Judith McKinnon knew of the complaints very shortly after that, on the same day, in fact. And 2 weeks previous, the Permanent Secretary had stated quite publicly that Judith would play a leading role in the management of harassment complaints. When those complaints surfaced, was paragraph 10 and the need to avoid apparent bias ever discussed at that point? Okay. I'll move on to the judicial review, if I may. Were you aware of the repeated requests by the former First Minister to ascertain the legality of the handling process through arbitration rather than judicial review at any point?
I was aware that arbitration had been mentioned.
And can you just expand on that? When you say you were aware, who made you aware of that?
In terms of the sort of regular update meetings, we were being made aware of just how things were progressing. So I was aware that I think mediation and arbitration had been mentioned, but that was, it was just an update meeting.
Sorry to press you on this, but can you expand on how it was mentioned? Was it a topic for discussion, or was it a matter of fact that arbitration has been suggested but it's also been rejected?
It was more along those lines. The meetings we were in weren't making decisions or commenting. It was just an update meeting so that we knew what the current position was. Because
of your pastoral role with the complainers, were the complainers ever made aware that arbitration was had been suggested.
I wasn't at that point. That had gone beyond the stage where I had any contact with individuals.
I understand. Okay. Just a couple more questions, if I may. In terms of the judicial review itself, it's clear that there was a kind of drip feeding of documents, or on 5 or 6 separate dates, additional documents were requested. Why, if you could see the line of inquiry that the judicial review was taking, why was the government not more forthcoming in just producing everything of relevance at the one time?
I don't know. I mean, we were responding to when we were asked for things. I don't know why there's a particular approach been taken.
Okay. And then when the judicial review concluded and collapsed and the case was conceded, was there any kind of wash-up meetings that followed that within the higher echelons of the government to look at lessons learned and follow-ups?
I'm not aware. I wasn't in the country when we conceded so I'm not sure whether there was anything immediately following.
And my final question, Convener, if I may, this was a £500,000 mistake that was made, and we've just learned from Judith McKinnon that 2 years after that case collapsed, this policy is still live and still open to the misinterpretation that led to the judicial review's collapse. Has there been, in your experience, any attempt in the last 2 years, other than the Dunlop review, to take remedial action on particularly paragraph 10 of the procedure?
I'm not aware of anything.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Convener, and good afternoon. Are you aware of the make-up of any group overseeing the judicial review and informing key decisions that the Scottish Government took? For example, which ministers were involved, special advisors, legal advisors and government officials?
So I wasn't involved in the handling of that at all. I'm aware that there were meetings, and I'm aware that on occasions the Permanent Secretary, I think the FM attended some special advisors, etc., but I wasn't involved.
In your role as Director for Communications and Ministerial Support, I assume you would want to be assured that the government were confident that their case was robust. Did you have any discussions in that regard?
No, that was obviously the Permanent Secretary would have a view on that.
Okay. And do you have any knowledge of the legal assessment that was made between the 27th of December and the 2nd of January 2019 relating to that decision to concede?
No.
Okay. So you don't know what the key change was as at the 2nd of January 2019?
No. Subsequently, I have seen correspondence that I was copied into at the time. And I understand it was in connection with the Para 10 and the investigating officer prior contact.
Okay. Can I ask Ms McKinnon this question? Were you shocked at the outcome of the judicial review and it's fairly stark, the finding that the Permanent Secretary's decision report and her letter were unlawful in respect to that they were taken in circumstances which were procedurally unfair and in respect that they were tainted by apparent basis? At the time that became known, were you shocked at that outcome, having
Yes.
been involved previously in some regard?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, Convener. Thank you.
Fraser.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning.
Morning.
Ms Allison, a lot of the ground I was going to cover has already been gone over, so I've just a very few short questions, just to follow up some of the questions around the judicial review. Alice Cole-Hamilton asked you about the issue of arbitration. It would seem to me that trying to resolve this by arbitration would have been preferable on a number of grounds. It would have been, in most cases, cheaper, quicker, and would have kept the matter private, which from the point of view of the complainants might have been seen as being an advantage. Do you have any understanding of why the Scottish Government refused to go down the route of arbitration?
No.
No. Okay, thank you. Were you involved at any point with discussions with legal counsel, either in-house or external, about the Scottish Government's legal position?
No.
No. Okay, thank you. And did you ever see the Scottish Government's legal advice at any point?
No.
No, you did not. Okay. And one final area I want to cover is the role of special advisors. Were you involved at any point with special advisors in relation to the judicial review process?
So there were, as I mentioned, we had regular update meetings, and special advisors would be involved in those meetings.
Right. Okay. And what was their role in those meetings?
So the particular role was in terms of media lines and comms lines. So we might be getting press interest. So you know, they would be obviously interested in how we were responding to that.
And that was the extent of their role?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
No more questions. Thank you.
Maureen Watt.
Good morning, Salson. You said you had more contact with Miss B than Miss A. In terms of the mediation that was offered, was it you that conveyed that to either Miss A or Miss B?
No, my understanding, the mediation offer was made when the investigation started. So that was beyond my point of contact. I had a point of contact up until HR took over, and I had no contact with either of them thereafter, other than 2 texts with Miss B in January 2018.
And was that in relation to the ongoing possibility of mediation or the judicial review?
The
subsequent text.
The subsequent context was me texting Miss B to say thank you for my Christmas card, and her texting back saying you're welcome. So it was in connection, but just for the sake of completeness, I had to contact for them.
So it wasn't you that relayed the possibility of mediation?
No.
And then in relation to arbitration, were they, you hadn't, that was HR that was...
As I understand it, yes.
Were you, in your senior role in government, copied in, were you one of the copied into people in relation to the judicial review decisions, and did you have any input into the judicial review decisions that were made by the Scottish Government?
No.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Jackie Bailey.
Just a small thing, because you referred to regular update meetings in response to Murdo Fraser. Would these be the same meetings that Judith McKinnon described to us? So there'd be media people there, comms people there. I'm curious because she was asked a question about special advisors, and she said there were no special advisors at those meetings, but you've just said that there were.
Yes, there were.
Okay, so who should I believe?
Well, I think, the interests were particularly around comms, so perhaps Miss McKinnon hadn't recognised that was their interest.
Okay, so who were the special advisors that were there on a fairly regular basis, or at all?
I don't know whether I'm at liberty to give names, sorry. I'm
They
happy to come back on that.
They are senior people.
Is that okay? So the people who, Liz Lloyd were there on occasion, and this is dreadful, I've forgotten his name, Stuart Nicholson.
Okay. I'm sure he won't be offended at that. I'm sure he won't. I'm sure he'd want to be incognito. So Liz Lloyd and Stuart Nicholson were the 2 special advisors.
Who would on occasion be there, yes.
Okay. How often? I mean, we see that meetings were twice, if not 3 times a week from Judith McKinnon's evidence. Would it be once a month, once a week?
No, they would be there, for a comms interest, regularly there, one or other. Would be there.
Okay, sorry to press you on this. Regularly is a very loose term. So would that be weekly? Would that be at every meeting? I'm just trying to get a feel.
Most meetings.
Most meetings. Yeah. Okay, so I'll take that, the majority of meetings. We can agree on that.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's all.
Okay. And finally to Margaret Mitchell.
Ms Alison, you mentioned about the police investigation, about contact with the police as Director of Communication. Can you say what contact you had, either directly with the police, on anything really to do with the handling of complaints or any complaints against the former First Minister?
So I had no contact with the police at that stage.
Right.
My contact with the police was in terms of the criminal investigation, and because I had texts from Miss B, I offered my phone to them to get the text from Miss B from my phone.
Right. And are you aware of when Police Scotland were first contacted about the, I think Miss McKinnon mentioned after the Permanent Secretary sent an email out, a kind of generic email, then contact was made with Police Scotland. Were you aware of that?
I was aware that contact had been made with Police Scotland in connection with support to potential complainants, etc. I was aware, but that was...
Were you kept advised as Director of Communications?
No.
So how were you aware of that then?
Trying to recall how I became aware. I can't recall. I think it must have been just an update that they had been in touch on the basis just to seek advice on how they might take forward complaints like this. I can't really recall how I became aware, sorry.
Yeah. It's quite a big thing really to contact. It's not something that would happen every day, and as Director of Communications, would you have expected to be fully informed about that?
No. I think, I mean, in terms of, my understanding was HR got in touch because it was about how they might handle those type of complaints.
And would that decision be taken by Nicola Richardson? Or we know that Miss McKinnon contacted the police, but would that be her decision alone?
I don't know.
Okay. And just finally on the mediation stuff, I recall from your last evidence session you said you were quite a fan of mediation.
Yes.
So while you didn't make any decisions about arbitration or mediation, did you have a view on whether that would have been appropriate at all in the management of these complaints?
I wasn't asked for a view, I think in terms of, as I said, I do think mediation can be very successful, but I think it does depend on the particular complaint. So yeah. I wasn't asked for a view at the time.
Right. And in terms of arbitration, again, you weren't part of the decision making, but did you have a view at all that this might be advantageous in any way to the complainers, given the level of publicity which has resulted and would inevitably result when things went to trial and during the judicial review process initially?
I wasn't asked for a view. I didn't take a view on it at the time. And
now would you have a view?
I think it would depend on the particular circumstances. And as I said, I wasn't involved in the investigation, so I didn't know what the full complaints were, so I wouldn't be appropriate, I don't think, for me to comment.
Yeah, but you were involved prior to the investigation.
I was involved prior to the investigation, but wasn't involved at that stage.
Right, but given your involvement prior to the investigation and your knowledge of the narrative, etc., do you think arbitration might have been something to at least consider?
I am assuming that these things were given full consideration at the time. I mean, as I said, I wasn't involved and I didn't know how it had progressed from my early contact, so I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment.
Right, so who was rejecting mediation, do you know that, and who rejected arbitration?
No, I understand that the complainants were asked, I think at least about mediation, but I don't know the detail of who took decisions on that.
Right, so none of that was discussed at Cabinet?
So at Cabinet?
At Cabinet, I know you did attend some Cabinet meetings where the procedure was... No.
No, I wasn't involved in Cabinet. I don't attend Cabinet meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that seems to be us. Can I thank Miss Allison very much for her evidence today? And that concludes the public evidence.